How do you know when to thin value bet in poker? Imagine you're sitting at the table and you see a chance to squeeze a little extra profit from a hand that's not quite the strongest. That's what thin value betting is all about. It's a way to get chips from hands that are only slightly worse than yours, but still have enough strength to call. The trick is knowing when the situation makes it worth risking a small bet for a small gain. First, think about your opponent's calling range. Are they the type to call with weaker hands? If yes, then you can consider thin value betting. For example, if you hold a hand like Queen Jack and the board shows Queen 9-5, and your opponent tends to call with hands like Queen 10 or 9-8, a small bet might get called by those worse hands. Next, look at how you appear at the table. If your image is tight and you usually only bet strong hands, your opponents might fold more often. But if you've been bluffing a lot, they could call lighter, making thin value bets more profitable. The texture of the board also matters. When a scare card hits, like a king or a jack that could improve your opponent's hand or make them cautious, they might call lighter if they think you're bluffing. If you have a hand with some showdown value, like a pair or to pair, betting small can tempt them to call with worse holdings. Another key point is how draws are playing out. If draws miss on the river, your opponent's range widens because they might be calling with hands that have no real equity anymore. If you hold a hand with decent showdown value, a small bet can get those weaker hands to pay you off. Bet sizing is also important. Smaller bets requiring less equity to be profitable, so if you bet a third of the pot and get called, your hand only needs to be slightly better than your opponent's range. Larger bets, on the other hand, can bring in more chips but need a higher chance of being called to be worthwhile. Balancing your thin value bets with occasional bluffs keeps your play unpredictable. If you only thin value bet, opponents might catch on and fold more often. Throwing in some bluffs in similar spots makes your overall strategy harder to read. For example, if you hold Queen Jack on a Queen 9-5 board and your opponent checks the river, you might bet a small amount if you've shown a tendency to bluff in similar situations. Hands like Queen 10 or 9-8 might call, giving you extra chips. In the end, knowing when to thin value bet comes down to reading your opponent's tendencies, understanding the board texture, and choosing the right bet size. Practice these decisions, and you'll find yourself extracting more value from hands that aren't the nuts but are still better than what your opponent might call with.